Okay, I'm going to go back and turn the lights off, or at least down, and then we'll... Okay, so we were talking about Tintoretto's work as a reflection of this movement, this art that we call mannerism, which is much more confusing, busy, unbalanced, unnatural, artificial than the works that we've been looking at earlier. And we discussed, sort of set that all up in class last Friday. So his Conversion of St. Paul, while it derives elements from Raphael's cartoon, which you would have known, right? Remember, that was available for him in Venice. He makes it much busier, much noisier, much louder. I read the Bible passage, and lo and behold, it doesn't mention anything about chaos. It only mentions that people stood around still because of the sound from heaven. They just froze them in their tracks. And so that, I think Raphael is a little bit closer to that. The only thing that sort of adds to the drama is Paul's horse charging away. But for Tintoretto, everything's like a thunderclap, right? It's this huge amount of sort of tumult that's taking place, and that's not there, right? So it's particularly mannerist in a lot of different ways, particularly in the jumble of figures. And what we're going to see today as we look at Tintoretto's work is that really all the way through the end of his career, he's active for about 50 years after this picture. He's active all the way to the 1490s. And for the last, I want to say 30 years of his career, he's incredibly successful. He has all of the major commissions in Venice are going to him. Not all, but it's a lion's share. He really hits it. He has some hiccups with that. There are some patrons who don't like what they get from him, but they take it nonetheless. And he seems to move from, I don't know, he's able to parlay things into being that much better, right? So yeah, that's where we left off. Now this one's in your textbook, The Miracle of the Slave. Tintoretto's big break came right around the time of the Conversion of St. Paul picture, which is a commission for one of the Scuole Grandi, the Scuola Grande San Marco, which is really kind of the biggest one of the group. If you know Venice, you know that the major cathedral in Venice is the Cathedral of St. Mark, San Marco. And so these are really one of the wealthiest and most prominent scuole of the six Scuole Grandi. So a huge commission from them. Now, it still is very, very mannerist. There's still sort of a jumble of figures. It's really tightly compacted, right? He loves these compositions where he squeezes figures in, including figures on either edge, almost like parentheses, around which the rest of it takes place. This is his early work. The Conversion of St. Paul doesn't really have that yet. So this is something, once he falls on this as a design principle, something that he kind of uses and reuses again and again. And the figures sometimes have something to do with the subject matter, like the fellow up there on the throne on the upper right, or this woman and the child on the left. But at the same time, he started divorcing them from the narrative and just using them as sort of elegant rhetorical figures that introduce the viewer into the scene. Right? Now, in mannerist elements, look at those amazing kinks, right? The fellow in the upper left corner, for example. Within the crowd, there are often strange and contorted poses. The anatomy's fine. That's not a problem at all. Right? But there's something about Tintoretto, and this is true throughout his career, that he's kind of a show-off. And he uses that as part of his marketing. He does things. And the show-off is in a couple ways. One, in this particular picture, look at all of the different views that we have of people. Fuda is not foreshortening the human figure, one of the hardest things in the world, especially like the face, right? Well, look at how many people you see from the top of their head, and you see the nose come in, right? I can take out 3 or 4 right away. right? Or the figure of the naked man on the ground, laying, and we'll talk about the story in just a second, with his head toward us, and the other one with his hind toward us on his knees, right? The figures sit on that cliff. Everything is just really difficult poses, right? And yet he's able to organize them and give it a sense of sort of eloquence and drama. And in a way, it's a sort of a tempered version of mannerism, you know? But it's still, I think, very mannerist in its ways, right? Again, crowded, inorganic spaces, odd colors. I've got some nice details from this. This is not my photo, but somebody else's. I've never been to Venice, camera in hand. Right? Look at that. Look at that pose of that figure. Right? The other way that Tintoretto is a bit of a flashy painter, if you will, a show-off, is that he makes it look as if it doesn't take him any time at all. He leaves, even more than Titian, leaves the brushstrokes to look as if they're sketches rather than the resolved finished product. And in fact, we'll find out later that he did in fact work quite quickly. That he was able to come up with finished compositions at breakneck speed. And that's part of the reason that some of the painters liked him, was his ability to almost ensure them from the get-go that he's going to finish it faster than anybody else could. So if you're a patron doling out money for work and, you want to make sure they're going to come in ahead of time and under budget, right? Just like a Hollywood producer one, ahead of time and under budget. And Tintoretto seemed to guarantee that. Who did? This one is right. If you pull your shoulder back like that, it will do that, but it's kind of emphasized, right? It's a little artificial and it's a little amplified. Yeah, and what we talked about last week Friday was the fact that part of mannerism was being amplified, right? And yeah, it's more than it needs to be. In the same way, the rippling muscles of Christ on that Bassano picture, right, of the miraculous draft of fishes, right, was also the same way. And again, some more of these details of the different figures. Now, this is the central part of the story, the miracle of the slave. This is not found in the Bible, but it's one of the miracles that was worked by St. Mark. And that makes sense because this is for the Scuola Grande of San Marco, right? And so this comes out of the Golden Legend. Do you know about the Golden Legend? I should have something on the slide for myself. In Latin, the author's name is Jacobus, Jacob. There's actually pronounced a number of different ways. Voragine or Voragine. Voragine is rather. And it's the Golden Legend. And this is sort of a 12th, 13th century compilation of the oral legends of the saints that appended the Bible and provided great biographical narrative details and stories that people were passing around about the lives of the saints, right? And like I said, it's extra biblical, even though some of the saints are saints that appear and the stories appear in the Bible, so those will be part of it. But oftentimes it also gives us the other part of these saint stories that happen after the events in the Bible were finished, right? So if you go to Voragine and you look up St. Mark, you find all these other stories about what happened after four Gospels and the Acts of the Apostles are over, right? And these other things. Right? And so here in this case, right, this comes directly out of Voragine. There's a legend of a Christian slave who's about to be executed because he venerated relics, right? He used relics as part of his prayer rather than the pagan idols he was supposed to use, right? So he's using Christian relics. And St. Mark kind of comes from heaven and intervenes and makes it so that the slave's body is impervious to harm. So here in the foreground you can see the torment. It's kind of fun, isn't it, this way, now that you know that. They're doing their darndest to, cut him up with axes Yeah, and what's happened? The axe is broken, right? And they're going to try and drive stakes into his chest or cut him to pieces. And basically, every tool that they're using to torture this guy doesn't work at all, and he's and all it does is shatter the shafts of the handles, the axe handles and whatnot. And so here in the center, as the crowd is looking down, right, that whole throng, that Manners throng, watching are like, I can't believe it, right? They're almost trying to get their R-rated movie thrills, right? I can't wait to see him cut open, and lo and behold, nothing happens. And you can see even the danger of that part of the splinter laying right on his face. I love how Tintoretto shows him as being stripped naked, and the fact that as a slave he was out working in the fields with his head is suntanned, right, and his body isn't because he had clothes on, so he's been stripped naked to be tortured, and of course nothing is going to work. And you can see that St. Mark at the top, right, holding his Bible, coming down from heaven, swooping in. There's something very odd about the physicality of the figure and the fact that he's flying, right, is all very odd. And at the same time, we've seen so many Venetian pictures where light kind of exudes from miracles, right? Christ will emit light, and things that are floating will be lit from the bottom, which kind of helps the floatiness, right? And in this case, St. Mark is lit from natural light coming in through the upper right corner. And so he's got that. It gives him so much more of a physical prowess, doesn't it, to have that heavy, heavy shadow on his body that it's almost like he's falling rather than flying, like he's diving in to help. But here he's intervening through his gesture, and of course through Christ, the gospel, the word, that he's able to do this, and all these wonderful details in the back. Again, we talked before about the impact of this architectural treatise by Serlio, Sebastiano Serlio, and Tintoretto, as much as Paris Bordone is also very much influenced by that. Right? And then that rhetorical figure in the center, this figure that is just sort of very eloquent and, as he presents it, is, look, can you believe it? And he's holding them up to the man in the upper right corner who ordered the torture. Right? There's our leader on his throne. Look, we're trying. We're doing. Don't hurt us. Don't kill us because we didn't do our job. And of course, he's also registering his own shock and awe. Everyone is at what's happening here. Everybody's shocked, right? There's a sense, I think, with this compared to the St. Paul that we looked at the beginning, that even though it's still Mannerist, there's a sense of organization here that doesn't exist in the earlier piece. This is not to say that he's not still a Mannerist artist, but there's something that's less cluttered and more organized, that's less awkward and artificial, and more fluent and graceful in this work, from the individual figures to the ability to make the teeming mass of figures and all of their movements work together so that that mass is doing something as a unit. Right? Now, this work for the Scuola Grande of San Marco joined other works that were already there. And I thought I'd just go back and show you two of these that this would have been seen in suite with, right, as part of the Scuola Grande. They're all now in the Accademia. They've been moved out of there. But this one by Gentili and Giovanni Bellini, where we see St. Mark in Alexandria. That's where he's eventually martyred, is in Alexandria. He's preaching in Alexandria. And they made Alexandria look like Venice, right? That's supposed to be some mosque in Alexandria, but it really looks an awful lot like San Marco in Venice. And the square looks a lot like Piazza San Marco in Venice. But these would have been seen sort of not side by side, but within the same sequencing, right? And another work, Paris Bordone's The Fisherman Delivering the Ring, is also from this same sequence of images, right? These are all in the Scuola Grande of San Marco, and we talked about Bordone before and how much he really is the conduit for these Serlio architectural ideas into Venetian art, and Tintoretto is picking up on it a bit. We'll see even more so in some of his other works. So if you weren't here before, Sebastiano Serlio, right, wrote a treatise on architecture and on stage sets, and Paris Bordone knew these drawings, knew Serlio, and it began to be introduced into Venetian painting as a way of setting the stage for these dramas. Now, Tintoretto's early Miracle of the Slave for the Scuola Grande of San Marco doesn't really look that much like Serlio, at least not as dramatically as Paris Bordone, but his later work, about 15 years later, does. Right? Here he's really channeling that Serlio element. So 15 years or so after the Miracle of the Slave, Tintoretto gets a second commission for two more works for the Scuola Grande in San Marco. They're supposed to go alongside his earlier work and all the others that were still there. So 15 years separate the two. Like I said, he's never really done being a mannerist artist. This is such a strange picture, the one on the right. But at the same time, it has the sense of eloquent posturing that we see enter into the Miracle of the Slave. The commission came from a man named Tommaso Rangone, and he's in both of them. This is not uncommon for people to appear in the works of art that they commission, but rarely do they ever appear playing such a prominent role. This is odd. He's one of the people who's helping. So what happened is St. Mark was set to be burned. His body had been even killed. He was set to be burned. The body did be consumed by flame because the Muslims who controlled Alexandria knew that the Christians worshipped relics, right? Remember the Miracle of the Slave. And they didn't want to leave any relics of St. Mark for people to worship, so they were going to burn the whole thing, right? And that way there's nothing left for the followers of Christ who might venerate the relics of St. Mark. And what happens, this is what I think makes this kind of a cool picture, is a tornado hits. And everybody runs for cover, and the disciples only grab the body, right, off the pyre and save it. And then they're going to take it back to Venice, where it's eventually buried. This is why San Marco is called San Marco. They have the body of St. Mark, right? This goes back to the 8th century, okay? So what we're seeing here is the moment when the thunderstorm hits, right? This tornado hits, and we see the lightning in the sky, and it turns bright red, and on the left you see all the people fleeing. There's a woman trying to hold that camel who's rearing up because of the storm. She's been knocked to the... You get the sense that she's being dragged around the square by that camel laying down figure, right? And in the foreground, knowing that this is an act of God and they're perfectly safe, we see the followers of St. Mark, along with Tommaso Rangone, grabbing the body, saving it. And this is a great... a really terrific anecdote. But the way they get the body out of Alexandria, this is so cool. They know that the Muslim, they put it on a cart of pork, right? There's a cart leaving, and they're taking it off to the port. The cart's like heaping with pork products that are going to be shipped off to the pagans, And they stick the body of St. Mark underneath the pork, knowing that the Muslims won't touch it because of whatever you call, I can't remember what to call it. Halal laws, thank you, halal laws. They won't touch it. So that's how they get the body out, and it ends up back in Venice, right? And this is all in the 8th century. It's all an act of God because Venice, remember, this was back really to one of the things we mentioned at the very beginning of class. Venice was not a Roman city, right? Venice is a later addition to the landscape of Italy. Whereas most places had Roman ruins, Roman history, Venice didn't. And that means they also didn't have a good set of relics. Because they weren't there, right, when the original followers of Christ were doing their thing. So there's nobody that died and was buried there that they could quickly look at. So they needed one. And St. Mark's body was it, right? The body of San Marco, St. Mark. And so these, for the Scuola, are interesting pictures in that they tell us the story of St. Mark and then also how that body ends up coming to Venice. Now, That said, if you look at the picture, this square where this all takes place, it plunges back, right? And again, it's very Serlio, right? Sebastiano Serlio in the architectural place. But on the left, we have that long arcade with a few steps leading up into it. That is a direct quote from the Piazza San Marco, right? So again, he's transforming North Africa to look like Venice, right? So here are some details. These are not all that hot, but I think you can begin to see something we'll see again is really there's just an abbreviation to how Tintoretto paints. Those swirling drapes, for example, are just a few strokes. And I know this is a blurry slide, but even the people themselves, he's able to capture drapery in what 1, 2, right? The highlight and the shadow, and yet it works as drapery. At the same time, there's something incredibly artificial, right? There's that repeated pose of the figures all fleeing up the steps and sort of, it's almost like a musical, where people do things in tandem. And at the same time, there are these figures that sort of are just, just there, right? And, or like a fashion model, right? They're voguing, they're posing there as well. Again, our figure on the ground, hair swept by the wind, and again, all of these white lines that you see throughout are, the tornado sweeping in, right? Those are the wind coming through, and he's trying her best to hold that camel. And again, you're starting to get the sense with those lines that she's being dragged through. I think she because of the hair, it's probably a he, but being dragged through the square as this happens. But of course, the apostles on the right are absolutely unbowed by this and are able to make off with him. Right? It's a great camel. It's great. I think Tintoretto's a fantastic painter. He really is. And again, they swirls around their feet. We'll see that in other pictures as well. Is it the rain, right? It's so thick. We have that kind of rain here, right? Where, you're just going to get drenched, so you might as well take off your shoes kind of that, right? And that's the current, if you will, sweeping around as the water runs off. Now remember that this was meant to go with the Miracle of the Slave that he painted 15 years before. And I noticed this, I'm not seeing this in the literature, the degree to which the body of St. Mark is kind of the same pose, right? It's just reversed, right? So it's a mirror of the same pose and then upside down. And he's repeating that pose in order to tie the sequence of images together, right? So the way the legs, one down, one up, the body leaning back away from you in space, is again that Tintoretto show-off, right? Virtuoso passages, but also I think he's using it to good effect to tie the work together across this. Right. From here, basically Tintoretto, from the 1560s on, especially with these second set of San Marco work, Tintoretto really, his career takes off, just takes off. Part of it is that by this point, excuse me, Titian's getting pretty old, right? Tintoretto becomes kind of, in many ways, almost one of the 2 or 3 go-to artists, right, of the time. We have one of the officials from San Marco down at the National Gallery. He's not out right now. The nose has been reworked a little bit. It's a great portrait, and he's wearing the robes along with that thing over the shoulder, which, interestingly, is supposed to be on the other shoulder, but Tintoretto moves it because it makes a better composition. Nobody seemed to mind, right? But he's wearing these beautiful ermine-lined robes as one of the leaders of the Scuola Grande of San Marco, and has that incredible expression on his face of hauteur, right? Haughtiness, yeah. And Tintoretto does quite a few portraits of very, very prominent people in Venice. Here, a Venetian senator, right? This is all because he's become, he's made his name, right? And his career is really, really taking off. I love how with the Venetian Senator on the right, the outdoors looks very much like the kind of landscape we saw in Titian and Giorgione, but it's not painted the same. It's painted in that sort of fast, quick, very rushed, very sketchy. It looks incredibly modern, right? Like an expressionist picture, or and that's one of the things I think that Tintoretto that's really one of his great strengths. We'll talk about this one more downtown because it's so big, it's hard to sort of get good pictures of it in class. This is huge, right? It's not, 15 feet across or something like that. But again, he's working for the highest levels of Venetian society. There's another procurator of San Marco on the left. I don't know his name. I need to look that up. I was hoping nobody would ask. Let's just suffice to say high official, right? But kneeling in front of him is the Doge, Alvise Mocenigo. And everybody else is his family. Probably the official San Marco is as well, part of the family. Even the angels are members of his family, right? Everybody but the Virgin and Child are members of the family, and his wife as well, right? So we'll have a chance to look at this downtown because it's such a monstrously large work. I'd rather sort of talk about it down there and talk here about things I need comparative material to talk about. He did quite a few works for Mocenigo. This is an unfinished work, about the same size, up at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and you see parts have just been sketched in. But at the same time, the Phipson are sketching. The angel on the left, the figure seated with the lute, the two figures standing next to him that haven't even been completed. There's a sense that even the sketchy parts of it have the brushwork laid down almost in the same fast, flashy, loose way as the other parts have been painted. Right. I thought this was nice to show you side by side because there he is again, 5 years later or so, in almost exactly the same pose. Right, just reversed. Get to my notes here. I don't know Tintoretto as well, so I have to pay more attention to my notes. This led to really one of his most important series of works, beginning around the same time as the second set of paintings that he did for San Marco, for the Scuola Grande of San Marco. And this is for another of the Scuole Grandi. This is for the Scuola Grande of San Rocco, which is the crucifixion scene that he did. And this is kind of an interesting story. First, this crucifixion is massive. This picture doesn't, it's like 40 feet across, right? So does that fit on this wall? No, right? And again, he's pulling out the stops. He's going to do everything he can to make it as dramatic as possible, to activate every part of it. And you can even see, left and right, that idea of the framing figures on either side that are derived from the narrative, but that he puts them out there as a way to attract you into the greater picture, right? Now, in this particular case, this is kind of a funny story. The Scuola of San Rocco, for which he's doing St. Roche in other languages, had actually announced a competition to decorate their meeting room. Right? And they invited the 5 most prominent artists out there. These included Tintoretto, and they also included Veronese, who we're going to talk about downtown, right? And the last artist we'll talk about, and 3 others. And they said, what we want from you is a sketch, right? And the sketch was of a scene from the life of San Rocco, and they sort of told them what it was. And give us a sketch, and we'll judge the merits. And Tintoretto did a finished work. And then he went a step further, and he actually had it installed on the ceiling where the finished work was going to go anyway, right? So he pulled a fast one on everybody. Everybody got pissed off at him, right? Because and there was a bylaw, there was an item in the bylaws of the Scuola of San Rocco that said, and he said, this is yours, just keep it. I don't care if you choose it or not, you can keep the work. Right, it's good for me. And there was a bylaw, an article in the bylaws of the Scuola that said that they could not refuse any gift that was given to them, right? Because they're a charitable organization, so if you get a gift, you can do something with it, right? So he
given it, and they have to keep it, right? And then they looked at it, right? So now it's already stuck on the ceiling. It's installed where they were going to put it anyway, if he had won, but it's already there. And Fahrenheit is not happy with him. The NPR is not happy with him. And in fact, the school is kind of upset with him, too. But they looked at it, they realized, okay, he did a completed painting in the same time that the other guy did a sketch. This might not be a bad guy to hire, because these works are going to be pretty huge, right? And this 40-foot crucifixion scene. You know, who's a good candidate to get that done? And so Tintoretto is, on one level, kind of foxy, right? Sly. But on the other level, he knows, yeah, he's a good businessman, right? He figured it out. Well, it's in your text, right? And a nice review of it, where you can see, again, that total, it's crowded, right? But not as confusing as there's a sense of organization that was missing from the scene, right? Where all the figures, even if they do things, this kind of have to lead your eye inward, right? And you can see what these are, right? These all they're raising this guy's cross, right? So this cross is on its way up, and these two fellows here are pulling on the cables, right? We have the ladder there that's going to be necessary to shore things up, right? Where's the third cross? 1, 2, 3. Maybe there's actually not even nailing down. So there's wonderful sense of time elapsing, right? But all of the figures can work in ways that sort of reorient your attention and focus it on the cross, right? So he's aware of how to leave parts open, like through here, right? And where to crowd them, and how to make these groups of figures work in a way that, coheres around Christ. So it's really very different from St. Paul, and it's his particular brand of mannerism, which is on one level very avant-garde, very modern for 16th century painting. But on the other level, it's not as confusing and strange as so many other mannerists are, at least not always. Sometimes it is. Right? So it works, he got the job, right? Spends basically all the way to the end of the 1580s. He's working off and on again on the decorations for the Scuola Grande di San Rocco, right? So again, this is a huge part of his prominence, his profile, his importance on the Venetian painting scene. Now, like I said, not all of his works have the same sense of cohesion and organization, although this one's not bad either, because you'll notice, again, the way he likes these framing figures, right? Where he's organized the picture. This is scenes from the book of Genesis around the moment when Moses gets the Ten Commandments. And while he's gone, the children of Israel get impatient, right? He says, hey, sit here and wait with Aaron. And they say, Aaron, he's been gone so long. Maybe we should worship another God. Maybe the God he's gone, maybe he got stood up by Jehovah. That's not what they say, but they say we should worship another God, right? And so they fashion a gold idol of a calf that they dance around, right? And when Moses comes down, right, so Moses is up against the Ten Commandments. And God says, hey, Moses, you better go down because the children of Israel are being bad again. Right? God tells him. And he goes back down. He's not got the Ten Commandments, right? Which is the whole point of going in the first place. He said, this is not what you need to do to be good. And they're dancing around idolatry, right? Dancing around pagan idols. And he gets so mad that he throws the tablets down and they break, right? He tears down the golden calf. He grinds it up. And he actually takes the... I just read this part. It's nice. I hear read my Bible. But he grinds up the golden calf and he mixes it with water and makes him drink it. Right? I know, it's pretty cool, isn't it? And then that's from Indiana Jones, right? The Ten Commandments end up in the Ark of the Covenant and, all of that. Right? So what we see here, interestingly, is primarily
a scene around the idolatry. Okay, that's the focus of the scene, is the idolatry itself. Although you'll notice the scene isn't particularly focused. We have these framing shadowy groups on the left and right. You know, each against a huge bank, and then it opens up almost like a theater piece, right? Like the curtains that are apart. And in the background, we see multiple scenes, 1, 2, 3, 4 different scenes back there, peeking through this peephole, if you will. Although peephole's wrong, it's a pretty huge picture, right? It's about 6 feet across. Like he's done before, he frames it, right, with these shadowed figures on the side. And so you can begin to see the Tintoretto composition, right, of this, although a little bit less organized than the Miracle of the Slave is. In many ways, these figures are related to the story. They're meant to be members of the Israelites. But at the same time, they are really there as such eloquent figures that it does, but I think it's meant to be, you know, really what it is meant to be foreign clothing. Right? Not modern clothing, but foreign clothing. So the stripes and whatnot are meant to be exotic. The one in the upper left corner? Yeah, with the blue. No, I totally agree. Okay, he's coming up next, right? Yeah. And then look at the sketchiness, right? Look at how those highlights, they're fantastic. It's just like, it's Manet, right? Velázquez or something. Each of which are significantly later. And again, these are the speed with which he paints. And I think it's, you know, when we talk about other artists and they leave things sketchy, sometimes it's deliberate artifice to make it look sketchy, when in fact it was anything but. So we last semester did a reading on Monet. Really when you look closely at Monet, it's not quick. He started outside, but he finished in the studio, and everything's very, very slow and deliberate. And he often has layers of paint over which there are other layers of paint, and repeat that again and again and again, so that some of them are laid down just to give texture, so when the brush comes across, it catches the texture. And that's a very deliberate way of painting, but at the end, it winds up looking sketchy. Right? And the point for Monet is to make the entire picture look as if he captured a brief and immediate moment of light. Right? And that light changes so fast that he couldn't resolve the picture. For Tintoretto, that's not why he's doing it, right? And this, I think, really is quickly painted. You can see that the paint that makes the highlights is very, very thin, right? He's got a lot of the medium within the pigment to allow him to take a brush full of paint and give us these zigzags that come down the sleeve that form the highlights of the sleeve. And everywhere we look, we can see, especially with the drapery, that it is almost like an impressionist work. It's so slightly resolved. And this is true everywhere. Now, Moses is cut off by the frame, which is really interesting. That's Moses' upper right corner, receiving the Ten Commandments. We see the light of God swirling out, smoke coming down the hill, little steps that he took to get up there. I guess that made it easier, right? Steps to the top of Mount Sinai. But there's Moses' feet and his body, and he kind of comes up to his hips and stops. And the question is whether or not this was trimmed at the top, if this was a taller picture originally, and he was really all the way there. Right? Because you'll notice the mountain is cut off at the very top of the peak as well. So we may have originally been able to see all of Moses. And when we get down there, we're going to take a look. Right? Because one of the ways we can tell is the way that they stretched canvases in the 16th century was different than the way we do it. Right? When we stretch canvases, you have a stretcher bar, right? You draw this in sort of large dimensions. We pull the canvas over the side here and nail it on the side. Right? And then pull this sort of on the side here. The way they stretch canvases was inside the frame. Like this. Right? Now, it didn't originally look like that, but they would nail it on the inside of the stretcher bar. And that means if you look at the very attention here, you can see a deformity like this of the weave and the wave of the canvas from where the nail is. It's called scouting, right? And you see it very clearly on the canvas. We're going to go down there and look and see if you can see the scouting, you found the original edge.
halfway, because really the theme of the picture isn't the receiving of the Ten Commandments. The theme of the picture is what happens when he's doing them. So other figures do get cut off by frames. We see a lot of figures cut off chests. We see their heads and whatnot. This is very, 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 very bold if indeed he did trim his ear. So the figure in the middle, which you might immediately assume to be Moses, when you read the text, it's Aaron, Moses' right-hand man. And while Moses is away, like I said, the children of Israel come to him and say, hey, maybe we should pass from an idol. And he goes, okay, bring me all your gold. Right? Every gold possession you have, bring in all your jewelry, you bring me your gold, and we'll use that, we'll melt it down, and we'll make the idol from the gold. And so here we see the children of Israel bringing Aaron all of their gold. Right? And then directly behind him, over his right shoulder, is the golden calf that's made from this. I wonder if that's Aaron the second time here or not, presiding over this. But there they are playing the musical instruments, and people on the left are starting to break into dance as well. So multiple scenes sort of appear throughout this. The Bible says that after they got done dancing, they sat down for a nice meal. And so we have two different scenes of meals over here, elegant meals with beautiful glass pitchers under makeshift tents off on the right. It looks as if after the meal they might be getting down to some other nasty business. This might be what's going on at the top there as well, because they're reclining there together. So this is in fact part of the biblical story. The figure on the left that lives in tatters and whatnot. The National Gallery says this is Aaron making the golden calf. Right? And that's possible it's got here, right? So that's a possibility. It's really hard to say. I want to go down and look at it again, right? Because my reproductions don't really show it well as to what that is at his feet. And it doesn't look like Aaron in the foreground. So I wonder if he's not Moses grinding the stuff up, destroying the golden calf. And then one could argue that maybe the meal that we're seeing at the right is part of that as well. Although I don't think so. I think that these things are all part of them misbehaving. Right. And this continues to the figures in the lower right corner, right? They probably, as Margaret rightly mentioned, a lot of these look like contemporary outfits, right? Modern outfits. And so there's this idea here that the wantonness of the children of Israel is picked up by these figures, these wonderful tiaras as well, right? But again, for Tintoretto, what he's doing is he's using them to expand the scene, but he's also using them as this sort of compositional device to bridge the distance between your space as a viewer and the pictorial space of the subject matter. About my favorite Tintoretto downtown, have had some problems with attribution. There have been some questions as to whether or not this is really by Tintoretto or not. And the reasons for questioning it are many. One of them that ought to become immediately apparent is that it's not particularly busy. There's a lot of emptiness here. Right? There's just Christ, and then there's the boat full of apostles on the Sea of Galilee. And really filled with a lot of void, which is relatively uncommon for Tintoretto. Now, the body of St. Mark picture, the second one with the funeral pyre, had a lot of empty space as well. Right? So that's not entirely in. The other thing is the color range, this almost overwhelming blue of the figure, of the painting that you see everywhere, is also something that has made people question whether or not this is by Tintoretto, because it's a color that is pretty much foreign to most of his works, and at the same time is not foreign to other artists that were in Venice in the 1470s. It doesn't look. That's right. Now, he's huge too, by the way. This is a very, very large picture.
This is 5.5 feet across, the base, right? Almost 4 feet tall, so he's not quite my size, right? So it's a little bit bigger than it shows up on the screen right now. Yeah. One look at the details and we'll see. But I agree that I think the biggest thing about it that makes it odd is how elongated the figure is. Look at how stretched his lower torso is, his legs in particular, very, very stretched. His face is elongated. The figures of the apostles in the boat, they're also having a certain elongation to them. This plus the blue, right, have led people to think that, why isn't it El Greco? El Greco is the champion mannerist painter for elongating figures. Also loved painting in tones of blue. Right? And El Greco was in Venice in the 1470s. El Greco had moved to Venice from Crete. Crete was part of the Venetian Republic. And he moved to the capital in 1460, began to shift from being an icon painter to being a Renaissance painter, right? Described himself as having studied under Titian, but we now think he may have had some contact with Tintoretto as well. He's there from 1460, goes off to Rome for a bit, probably back in the 1470s, before he finally moves to Spain, where he spends the rest of his career. The work on your right from the National Gallery is from Spain, the Spanish part of his career, right, from 1480 or so, 1580 or so, through to 1614 when he dies. And the bluest works from El Greco, and the most elongated works from El Greco, come from his Spanish period, not his Venetian period. So that renders problematic it being a El Greco. The other thing that renders it problematic is that El Greco's works, while he was in Venice, look more like your standard kind of Tintorettos, right? Where figures are pulled from, this is Christ going into the temple, where people are wheeling and dealing. And, this is my Father's house, get out of here, you're spoiling the temple, and he drives them away. And we have this sort of Tintoretto-like jumble of figures that show a range of poses, the painter's skill, but also pull some of the figures out of the narrative, the woman with the birds, for example, the old man with the bread, and use them as sort of these introductory devices into the thing. Or that demonstration piece of the little baby on the steps, right? There's all sorts of Tintoretto elements. Even the architecture in the back, or the architecture of the room, is stereoleo architecture, right? It's really channeling Tintoretto. So to have the work that doesn't really look like a Tintoretto be by El Greco doesn't make any sense, because El Greco looked like Tintoretto when he was there. The other thing is the scale on it. Love Photoshop for being able to do these, or PowerPoint, right? That's about the scale size of these. When El Greco was working in Venice, he was working for private patrons, and his pictures were really small, right? This is huge. He didn't have commissions like that when he was in Venice, so it's probably not an El Greco, right? Even though there's some elements there. And it could be that this was one of the major inspirations for El Greco's work, right? Now, why Tintoretto? Well, this is one of the things to compare it to. This is in a private collection, so I don't have a very good photo of it. But if you look at the body of Christ in the two of these, the basic pose, there's a great similarity between them. In fact, the pose seems to derive from the same sketch, but altered for each of the two different venues. Those who have spent a lot of time studying, the way that he highlights the waves here, which is really beautiful, isn't it? It's almost opalescent, all those colors, but the white highlight on the top of the waves is apparently totally consistent with other Tintoretto pieces. So, again, you and I, Margaret, have not looked at as many of them as the people who come to this conclusion, right?
It's okay. You wouldn't be alone in saying, I'm not so sure. Right? Now, the subject at hand, right? I've got Christ on the Sea of Galilee. In fact, the title that the National Gallery says is Christ at the Sea of Galilee. So this first, what it looks like is that Christ is walking on the water. And this is that moment, right, where after the resurrection, he appears to the disciples. He walks on the water. Peter tries to walk on the water as well, right, and he sinks because of his lack of faith. And you'll notice the way in which Peter steps out of the boat, and almost as if he steps onto the water. Right? And again, there are those lines of water that we saw. I'm not arguing for Cinderella. That we saw in the St. Mark's body being removed from the funeral pyre there. But here's Peter coming out of the boat, right, onto the choppy water as Christ calls to him. Let me get my notes in. This is all found in Matthew 14, right? The disciples saw him walking on the lake. Peter said, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And he does. And then the story says in Matthew that Peter looked up, saw the wind, became afraid, and began to sink. Right? He looked around him and realized he was in danger, refused to trust the Lord anymore, and started to sink. So we're seeing Peter coming to join Christ on the water. That said, if you look closely, Christ isn't on the water. He's on the shore. And the shore continues under his feet, and the waves are kicking up around his ankles. So he's actually standing on the ground that we see behind his hips, that comes around and joins the land that you see on the right. So he's not really on the water. He's not out on the lake. He's on the shore of the lake with the choppy water breaking from around his feet. Nice detail here as well. And there you can see flowers around his feet as well. He's not out in the middle of the water, right? This means that it's not Matthew 14, asking Peter to walk on the water with him, but rather it's John 21. And in John 21, Christ appears on the shore. And the disciples are in a boat, and they don't recognize him. Right? So let's go back to the boat. Right? And at this point, Christ says to them, throw your nets on the other side, and you'll drag in a bunch of fish. And they do, and they're unable to even haul in the net. And then Peter recognizes him, and he just dives in. He just leaps into the lake, right? Because he wants to go meet Christ. He's not going to walk on the water this time, right? He's just going to go swim up to him. And what's interesting is that this is, again, the miraculous draw of fishes, right? But this happens twice in the Bible. So the one that we looked at last week, right, was the first miraculous draw. This is in Luke chapter 5. This happens while Christ is alive. He gets into the boat with them. That's how you can tell the difference. Right? He gets in the boat with them and tells them to cast the net. After the resurrection, this is Jesus after the resurrection, he appears to them again and he mirrors everything that happened before, but from shore rather than in the boat. That's why they don't recognize him, is because they think he's dead. Right? Now I want to go back and look more closely at his hand to see if we can see the scar or his feet, since this is after the resurrection. That said, notice the similarity in certain little details here and there, you know? This figure back here is probably St. Andrew. And his cape is blowing in the wind, right? The figure at the helm here is borrowing inventively from what we saw before. And of course, the pose of the figure pulling out the fish is, of course, a direct quote from what happened the first time around. Right? So certainly Tintoretto is aware of this on his picture memory ground up back in Venice. He could easily have seen it. Could also seen the Raphael and uses it as the basis for this because, again, this is a parallelism. This is a reflection of the first time that it happened. Well,
here's the pictures that Bianca knows better than I do now of Susanna, and they really don't have much to add to it. She's writing a really interesting paper about Tintoretto's show-offiness and how it enters into the rivalry. But Susanna was seen while bathing by two elders, and they appeared through an arbor back here. Tintoretto did multiple versions of this. At least there are records of multiple versions. I don't think any of them survive. But what's interesting is that, of course, these people in the back are misbehaving. They're not supposed to be looking at her while she bathes. And yet you and I, the viewers, get the opportunity to do so. And I've always been sort of intrigued by that the owner of this picture looks at people in the image who are sinning for looking at her nakedness, but it's perfectly okay for that owner to do so. Right? And this idea of viewing mythological or biblical figures nude, I wish I brought it in. I didn't. I was going to bring in Diana and Actaeon by Titian, who stumbles onto Diana naked and has to die for it, right? Horribly at that, right? Torn apart by his own pets, simply for having seen. Susanna's no goddess, right? She's a human, but still there's this idea of viewership and punishment. I do love in this particular picture. It's really quite large. That orange is spectacular. Again, one of the things we've been talking about with Venetian painting again and again and again is color. And their sort of first dibs, if you will, first call on these important pigments that are coming in to the ports of Venice. And this is, we saw it in the earliest pictures we looked at, and we continue to see it here. But also Tintoretto's ability to sort of just map things out with the sketchiest of means. And whether it's the gauze that covers Susanna's hips and thighs, or our two figures in the background skulking around, any of these are rendered as briefly as possible. Our last Tintoretto also has attribution problems. It's not signed, and so we don't know for sure. Some people suggest it's Tintoretto's son, Domenico Tintoretto. The last name, by the way, Tintoretto means, his real last name is Robusti. But Tintoretto comes from the fact that his father, Jacopo's father, was a fabric dyer, dyed fabric. But that might, I want to go with that now, right? His father, think of all those wonderful fabrics you can see him, right? That even if it's a Moses, that beautiful, yeah, the blue diamonds. Anyway, his father was a fabric dyer, and that's where Tintoretto came from. It was really just Jacopo or Robusti. And he had a son, Domenico, who he taught and was a studio assistant and continued sort of the Tintoretto name into the 17th century. And there's been some discussion that the Madonna of the Stars on the left might be by Domenico. Simply because Tintoretto's rarely that focused, right? It just doesn't fit in with the kinds of things you've seen, although I think Susanna also is moving away from the busy, even when it's organized, the busy crowdedness of his work, which might well be part of the Counter-Reformation, which we'll talk about more. It is a bit cheesy, isn't it? It's very sappy. Yeah. It's sentimental, right? Yeah. I mean, I like it quite a bit. I love the fact that it's the monochrome nature of it is really one of the strengths of it, isn't it? Now, there's a couple things that are interesting about this. One of them is that I think it's been trimmed. I want to go down and look at the edges, but you'll notice that one of the angels aren't symmetrical around her. And in fact, he's cropped off the head of one of them on the far right. So the question is, what does the edge of the canvas look like? And we'll go up and look. And the other thing we'll want to see, right, because when they painted things, oftentimes they would see the very edge of the paint here. So if you can see a part of the canvas where there's no paint, well, good, right? We have nothing to cut away. And sometimes when you get up in the audience, look around the edge, noses on the edge of the frame and see. So
these are questions that bring this together that I think I want to know what's going on there. There's a line that runs across here, or runs back a little bit more closely, because I want to know if he added canvas to the top, or if that's from a frame that's worn through it at some point. I don't know, right? And we're lucky because we can just go down and look at these things. I think part of the reason that people think it's Tintoretto is that the face of the Madonna looks like this one a lot, right? And so if we compare the two of those side by side, there's an anatomy to this. There's the proportion of the eyes that really reeks of Jacopo Tintoretto. That is a very good argument, Margaret. Yes, the son could have access to the father's drawings. That's not proof in itself. And so one of the things that if you were to do research on this, you would have to call up the National Gallery and ask to see their files, because they've got a reason for putting Jacopo on it now, when the catalog from 1985 said Domenico, right? So somebody's weighed in, somebody's measuring brush strokes, doing, maybe there's something underneath it, right? There's a reused canvas. I don't know. That is demonstrating to people that this is definitely Jacopo Tintoretto, right? Here's where we can trust the experts, right? Now, the subject matter of this was the stars around her head. You can see them against the yellow ground and the angels then floating around that. There are 8 stars there. This goes back, so I wanted to talk about 2 things about this real quick. The idea of the star of the sea. Mary's name in Hebrew is Miriam, and Miriam in Hebrew, if you split it up, Miriam is drop of the sea, or star of the sea. And that became a metaphor for the Virgin Mary. So I always see stars on her shoulders like this, because she is the guide to the harbor, if you will, right? She steers us, she directs us, or directs us to Christ in this particular case, right? So that's certainly part of the subject matter that Tintoretto is working with here. Another is the idea of the Virgin as a vision for viewers, right? A painter from Ferrara in the National Gallery with the angels floating around the outside of her head. She has an aura, not necessarily stars, are visionary figures down below. This is tying into what she is as well. She's meant to be a vision for you, right? And when we think about the Virgin as a vision, often she appears as a vision crowned with stars. So in this particular case, Dürer gives us the print. This is the frontispiece to his famous series of the Apocalypse, series of prints he originally did in 1498, comes back with a cover sheet for it later, shows St. John, it's his eagle, and the Virgin appearing to him in a vision. And you'll notice that she's carrying Christ in her arms, and her crown quite literally has stars in it, right? So being crowned with a corona of stars like this, it ties into this idea of the visionary appearance of the Virgin Mary, right? Within the book of Revelation, there's the apocalyptic woman who also appears with a crown of stars, thought to be in John's vision, the Virgin Mary appearing to him again, in this case next to the 7-headed beast, right? So this all are things that Tintoretto, I think, is tapping into, these different elements, right? So her as well, head surrounded by the stars. And this is the frontispiece to Dürer's set of prints on the life of the Virgin Mary. Where you can see quite literally a crown of stars just like Tintoretto's, right? Floating above her head. And in this case, seated on a crescent moon, which Tintoretto's is not. Now this all ties into, this is real quick, the idea of the Immaculate Conception. This is a fairly new theological idea, the Immaculate Conception. It is not the Virgin birth of Christ. The Immaculate Conception is that the Virgin Mary herself was born to a virgin. She was immaculately conceived. Right? So the Virgin birth of Christ is one part of theology, that Christ's Father is God. Right? But another theological point is that the Virgin Mary's Father is God as well. And she was born without original sin. But St. Anne, her mother, has similar visitation. It's not the Bible anywhere, at least not the standard version of it, right? But it began around 1477. In 1477, these was set up to honor it, but it did not become doctrine until the 19th century. Right? So it's still kind of fun. How do you take something in honor of the Immaculate Conception? And what they did was they used the lines from St. John, which said the Revelation, which when he saw the apocalyptic woman start round with stars, and standing on a crescent moon. That's not the apocalyptic woman, it's right? Mary in heaven. So the Immaculate Conception, Mary in heaven, should follow that. So here's an 18th century Venetian drawing of the Immaculate Conception. She's saying it's not a little Immaculate. But she's on the crescent moon. She has the crown of thorns, or crown of stars, right? This is exactly what Tintoretto was thinking of. Right? The thing is that when Tintoretto painted this, there wasn't a set of rules on how to do it. Right? And that means that the number of stars fluctuates. That means that the crescent moon can come and go. Right? But what he's doing with this is he's making her a vision for you. Right? A vision of Mary in heaven, crowned by stars, which links her to the apocalyptic woman, John's vision. Your vision is like a vision of St. John. Right? As he writes the book of Revelation, it parallels that. Right? So, that's right. It wasn't until 1615 that we actually had a rule on how to paint the Immaculate Conception. So we don't have it set down yet. Tintoretto doesn't follow it exactly because no one was following it exactly yet. Okay, I'm trying to keep you late. I had to cut the time so we don't have to worry about it. So, remember Friday, National Gallery. So meet out in front of the main house as close after 10 o'clock as you can. Also, reading in response, the last reading with a response for that day as well, for Friday.